Hello. How are you doing? Um, Cheers. Should we say anything now before I officially start what I would put on YouTube?
Okay, that popped up. It's not really important, but
Cool. Okay, let's just start then. Okay, we started. I'm recording. Yeah, okay. So I'll officially start now. So I'd like to introduce you to Leander Bindewald, who I'm very happy to have joining me on my YouTube channel. So I'll introduce you, Leander, if that's all right. Chip in if I miss anything. So I am going to say something, a bold statement. I think you are one of the world's leading experts on money. Would you agree with that?
we'll see.
We'll see. So I think you are, like, in a very modest way. But so we used to work together on money, actually. And Leander's also done a PhD about defining money. But you could define it more precisely than that, your PhD. But that'll do when it's that vague area, which isn't vague. Well, maybe it is vague. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I wanted to chat to Leander for a few reasons. One is that I have worked with Leander on money, but become slightly disillusioned and a bit unable to talk about it. But it's cropping back in my life and it's become like increasingly important again. So I'm finding myself coming back to it, and Leander's been writing and thinking about it almost constantly for the last, I don't know how many years. So anyway, I'm glad we can have this chat. So anyway, and the goals of this are a bit vague, but we're going to try and define money and just generally talk about money. And also, I think I would also like to get a sense of what Leander thinks about what we should do, if anything, about money and some of the current initiatives around money. But that is that all right? That's maybe too. Let's just start. I might out. Okay, maybe that's too long instruction. One other thing I'm going to say about Leander, though, is I think you're also living your life in a way that's quite reflective of the values that you talk about and write about, which is sometimes rare for people in social movements. So what's that?
I blushed.
Oh, that's nice. You're mind blushing, but that'll have to do. So anyway, cool. So anything to add? Was that an okay introduction?
I guess it's a bit over the top, but
okay, I can edit this out.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Welcome. Yeah. So, what is money? I thought a good starting point is the picture that you took. Could you talk us through that picture?
Do you mean what it is or what it means, or both? Well, what it is the easy one.
You feel you could describe the picture.
Just to say, it's actually real. It was a transparent donation box in Kew Gardens.
Yeah.
Where I just happened to stroll by and thought, oh look, there's something else in there, and took a picture that stuck with me forever now, where it's just there's money in different national currencies, which is mostly as far as people get on the topic, and then there's this little piece of paper showing that our relationships with each other, so that visitor in relation to Kew Garden, could be done in so many different ways. And I particularly like that they can't remember what figure it is, but they crossed it out and said, actually.
So I like this, but I show people this picture if I'm introducing the topic of money sometimes. I'm like, what is a good way to think about what it is? I mean, you could describe it as showing, I guess if people really wanted to interpret it like this, they could look at that picture and interpret it as money is a form of debt because of the IOU, but that's not how you'd interpret it.
That's just another technical term wrapped around a very social relationship, which kind of makes it easier and harder. It makes it easier because they don't have to really feel into it and go to the depths of what all that means. They pretend that IOU means something very certain and very clear, and everybody understands when they say that. And and that's also why it makes it more difficult to see it that way.
When I used to work with you, Leander, I found you frustratingly vague. And if I hadn't known you work better, I'd find that answer infuriatingly vague. Now I'm just kind of accepting it. I don't know how people at home will feel if that's too vague, but it's quite deep though when you're saying IOU doesn't necessarily mean a debt.
Well, thanks for rephrasing it in a clear way. I guess that's what I was saying in a convoluted way. And
And you were saying
I
other
mean,
things too, so I've just wiped out some of the other stuff and just kept one element of it. You were
yeah,
adding
thanks.
other things
That
in.
probably helps. And I do have, I admit that I have a weird relationship with language. I totally enjoy it in making convoluted sentences. And while, or maybe because I'm also very aware that it's just words and
Mhm.
we gave them meaning, and we are often a lot, well, we should think about the meaning more carefully and not just assume it's a proper, clearly defined thing.
Yeah.
Which just means, yeah, there's this really, I should have prepared better. There's this beautiful quote by Rainer Maria Rilke. I don't know if that's a um, poet that people in England know. It's like a school
I'm
book
good for
poet
it.
in German language, and he writes very beautifully, mystically, but like early 20th century, so quite accessible. And he just says you're killing all the things by putting labels on them. Like particularly, he talks about nature and mountains and everything, and by just giving them a name, it's like done, it's done and
Yeah.
sorted, and
So
that's
let's come back to the IOU then, because what I'm hearing from you saying that is I'm thinking, it's making me think, when I first look at it, I think IOU means a debt. And my initial thought of that picture is whoever wrote IOU won and crossed it out was making the point that money can be debt. But now hearing you talk, I'm actually seeing I could interpret it another way, which is somebody that's come to Kew Gardens, really liked it, doesn't have any money at the moment, but was just putting a little note in of appreciation. You could also interpret that debt as a note of appreciation or a, which is, but it's still hard to not interpret it as some kind of a debt, isn't it?
well, but it's it was easy for me to accept your shorthand of what I said, because I would have to go back to you and go like, on what do you mean with debt? How do you know
Oh,
I mean it's debt or not debt, if unless you give me a very clear definition of debt? And any
yeah,
definition you're going to give me, there's probably so many words in there that really need teasing out until we can be sure that you and me have the same understanding of that. And
I agree, I
that's
agree.
difficult between the two of us, and we even work together. And you heard me talk for the last, I don't know.
And debt is such a big one. Like debt is probably, yeah, there's like, well, if people watching at home find this infuriating, it's because debt is a hugely contentious word as well and has loads of different forms and interpretations, which
Mm.
we could come back to. But so from now, all we're saying, I think the only thing, not the only thing, it's still a big thing, we're presenting this picture of money, which shows different forms of currency as a type of money. And we're also showing this of a thing, which is a note, which we don't know if it's, we don't really know what that is, that little IOU. We just observing it, that somebody's chosen to put it in this donations bin at Kew Gardens, and we're leaving it up to you to understand what that means for now, because we don't know what that person was doing when they did it, and it wasn't you, Leander. You didn't just put it
Nope.
in and say,
Well, me.
okay, as long as it wasn't you or your mate, it was there already, which is great.
But
Okay.
it's really great as a little, how do you say, a trip line or something that people trip over when they look into a donation box and there's something else but in there.
Yeah,
It could
yeah,
be a litter, and that would be
yeah.
infuriating. But just seeing something else in there at least makes one stop and wonder.
Yeah.
And if that would happen more often with more people in regards to money in whatever form or definitions or questions they come to afterwards, that would greatly help just to bring it back into consciousness and awareness that there is something that we do and use and um, follow the rules of, but without actually giving ourselves the agency of creating these rules and questioning them and holding people accountable for maybe having come up with rules that are not suitable or agreeable at the moment.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is, well, I know what you're saying, but I think I know. I mean, I'm going to
Rephrase it, come on.
get too meta. It's going to get too meta. But I'm hoping that people are taking from this, because what I'm taking from this is, and what I always, the thing about the topic of money, although I found that I disagree with a lot of people's view on money, particularly the ones around at the moment, for example, modern monetary theory, there are a lot of people talking about money in ways that I don't quite, I'm not quite on board with what they're saying. However, I love the fact they're questioning it. And I think anything that gets people to step into this topic, which most people don't get to question, and that's why I love that picture, is I think it already opens up. It often will open up it will open up the debate a bit more. So that's what I like about this whole area of money. Is, however, then the thing that, but that's enough, and that's what I think that's what I've just rephrased it badly, but I think that's what I think we're walking around, this idea that actually it's a topic that is that, well, you said it much better. Say it. Do you want to say it again, what you said? Because you said something about the rules that we maybe don't understand, that what did you say? Can you say it again?
Well, I wouldn't say the rules of money, because that was my whole point of my PhD.
Yeah.
That word is too ambiguous and too loaded and too old, basically, and it's not carrying the weight anymore, or it shouldn't. So I would say, you already said currencies, forms of money. I normally would say money is just a very quite open idea. It's a concept that there can be something as money. When you bring that idea into the world and make it actually useful and tangible and implement it, so to say, I would always talk about currencies then. And so the currencies we currently have, like the big ones, the euro, the pound sterling, the dollar, they of course are set by rules. I mean, if you describe that conceptual money as an institution, as a discursive institution, that's rules, basically. And those rules were set at some point, implicitly or explicitly, some very old, some very recent, but most people don't look at it that way and question those rules. So those rules might have been, well, looking back, you could always probably find out why somebody thought that kind of rule was smart, but world is changing and they might just not be suitable anymore or agreeable. Even they might be suitable, and yet we would like to see something else, even if it doesn't make economic sense. And that
so
openness to discussion isn't there with money.
So I think that's part of the idea that you mentioned, the discursive institution. But from what you've said, what I wanted you to repeat was this idea that there are specific currencies in operation. For example, the pound sterling, the dollar, the euro, do actually have quite clear rules, but they may not be questioned by people. And the really cool thing about that picture is it puts those currencies that have these clear rules that we don't question alongside this very questionable piece of paper, which somehow, by being there, makes everything a bit more. I think it's that's what I think that picture does really nicely. And then when you start seeing that there might be, then you start almost seeing but I think some people can see the power dynamics behind the euro and the pound sterling, the dollar. But perhaps if you've never considered there might be any other form of currency aside from those, then this is a good entry point for it. So I feel like we've almost got there to what your definition then of money is, which is,
well, so my definition, money is just a concept. That's my definition of money. Like, you could, of course, then ask, what is that concept? And I would say it's the idea that there can be transferable units that facilitate our collaboration somehow. Just any units. And of course, you can go far outside of the money box then and find unit systems that do that as well, that work easily well. You could go language is such a system as well, but like the transferable unit where you have it and then the other person has it, and that has ignited something, that I think would then be that idea of money.
So
you always need to separate it then.
To collaborate in some way. A transferable unit that allows us to collaborate in some way is the basic idea of money, and it has some similarities with language, and it is in a sense a form of conversation, isn't it? In one of the last interviews I did, Monajit talked about a really good Amartya Sen quote about how markets are potentially just seen as conversations between people, and you could therefore look at money as something you could add to a market, but you don't have to. You could have markets without money. However,
and it's a rabbit hole, like saying money is like language. There's so many scholars who have had that idea, and so many who fight against it, saying it's just an analogy. What are you actually saying? But it's sometimes useful also in terms of saying there are very specific scientific jargons, for example, which were kind of deliberately created for some people to have a very specific conversation. In the same way, you can go like, when you do a certain currency, you're creating a specific exchange mechanism for a very specific purpose. but that specificity and that design thinking behind it is kind of lost with the money that we know, like pound sterling and dollar and euro. And that's also why it's important to me to give money that vagueness, like saying it's just a concept, it's not a thing, is because it's really difficult to imagine something to be different if you use the word money for something big and open, and everybody does that. Everybody knows that money comes in different forms, comes in different comes in different denominations. It's always open, and you know that sometimes shells or grains or something completely different was money. So you know it's not just pound sterling. At the same time, you say money when you pull out a pound sterling note. So at the same time, being something very specific and very tangible and something open makes it really hard for people to approach that topic, because it just always seems overbearing. So if you use that word only for the big and open thing, and then use the word currency for all the tangible, concrete implementations, it helps you to tease it out and talk about it better. Even in the law, I mean, that was the one policy proposal, bold policy proposal of my PhD, was like you could solve or sort out the whole mess in financial regulation, which is down to them not having a concise definition of money, by just scrapping that word entirely. If you want to regulate something, regulate pound sterling and say that. And don't ever say money, because it's not up to anybody to regulate the idea of money.
Yeah. So like you have language as a concept, and then a country will choose their specific dialect.
Yeah, or like, yes, they choose their tongue, they choose their dialect, they choose their grammar, and sometimes that also just evolves by very little tiny decisions or practices that become something observable afterwards only. But
and in a similar way, it's quite similar in that you do, in some places, certain other types of dialect are literally outlawed. Maybe not outlawed.
Yeah, or some certain dialects are deliberately created just to separate yourself, or to have a secret language, say.
Yeah.
I can't remember what those funny things are in England. What was it? Isn't there a London dialect where everything is back to
Cockney?
Maybe.
Cockney rhyming slang? Like, I can't even think of any. Give the dog a bone means cool.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I mean, there you can see how there's a very strong deliberate element in there.
I had a really good, I wish I'd written it down. I had a really interesting, which actually brings me, which it's in my head because I can't remember it at all, but it's something along the lines of, just spilled my coffee. I was trying to think of this quote. It's a quote about the difference between a language and a dialect, and one of them having a nation state and an army to back it up. And that kind of, to me, is quite similar to the idea of money. So this is the thing that infuriates me about a lot of definitions of, not definitions, but a lot of the, so I don't know if this is a good thing to bring up now, but I'll have to bring it up at some point. But I suppose being
power, come on, take out the guns.
Yeah, it's the power element, which I feel is, well, two elements which maybe are the same point, but I feel they're slightly different dimensions. One is in the world that me and Leander have moved in, which is one where everybody's trying to do community projects and start their own currency, of which I have been a perpetrator of. I've inflicted a currency on the world, and I've been inflicted. I'm in a centre, but I've also been in this idea. I've tried several different ones, actually several projects, with the idea, but that there are limitations to how money works, and there are lots of issues of how it perpetrates power relationships, and then started our own currency without realising that unintentionally we have actually repeated all the same power relationships in our own currency. And then, so the thing, and the more I learned about history and actually how certain currencies did gain such enormous power and are continuing to maintain that power today, it feels like a real omission sometimes in how people talk about money, is failing to see, and I guess for me, where I got into this was from understanding the City of London and just like walking around all the institutions like the Bank of England, which has Britannia, the British Empire, as its helm, and of course the way that our currency was formed and gained power was built up alongside developing Britannia, the British Empire. And there's the form of a currency, and there's also the way it is used. And so on some level that's about power, but I also feel there's something about consent. It's about people not having any choice but to have to use this currency. And I suppose the forerunner, actually, Britannia came to London, or was put on our coins initially because of the Roman Empire, because that's what they did. They had their empire in London, and they chose Britannia to go on Roman on the coins in London because they thought she was a emblem that people in Britain worship, so they kind of adopted, they blinged her up a bit and put her on our coins. So this is kind of how so many of our currencies end up being used. It's by a powerful entity with an army that decides that everybody else must use this currency. So that was a bit of a rant, but I guess I was just positioning it to you.
It's similar to what I said earlier. Like,
yeah,
most people have never thought about their consent to these big systems that make up our society. They just accept it as it was a given. And that's when power really becomes problematic. There's always power, and you will always shift, and there's different ways of participating in it or legitimizing it. But if you don't even know that there has been a decision done for you, that's the worst kind then. I mean, that sounds like H.G. Wells' Time Machine, where the slave race doesn't even know anymore that they're enslaved. They think that's...
And I find that's a really dangerous thing about... one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with the British Empire is because nobody knows about it in Britain. And particularly given the recent conflicts in the Middle East, where...
I won't refer to it, but the next thing I say, just in case you cut it out. But it's well, the next level of complication, of course, comes with if you have power that is opaque, that you never consented to, and you don't even know there was something to consent to or not, and then you become so involved because it also benefits you. Like, it's so convenient, it's so nice, and you can have a little piece of that power. Say you can earn some money and feel a little more powerful, and then you invest it in the maintenance of the power that you never consented to, that you might never have chosen for the world or for yourself to exist. And that if you I have one little concrete thing and I could add.
That's so good. What you just said, I've not heard anyone say that before as clearly. And it's
and it leads to very...
Yes.
Go rephrase it, and I have a good example for it.
So it's the fact that you don't realize you're consenting to this system of how currencies work. And then because you never officially consent to taking part in sterling, for example, you then, if you're British, you probably will benefit from sterling, the power that sterling has. You may also be harmed by it. So there's, the benefit that we have, that I benefit from it because I can buy the sterling is a very strong currency, and it's questionable how its strength has been maintained and will be in the future. But for now, it means that I can basically buy stuff from other countries whose currency is weaker, and it means that I benefit from this amazing purchasing power. There is a flip side, which is about that means that it's hard for us to export. Let's not get into the flip side. I think
as long as you can fly to another country and buy a cheap drink, you're benefiting from
those benefits. Yeah, if you work in a manufacturing firm that closed because the currency was too high for us to be able to produce and export things. I think it's hard for our society as well. And there's also all the stuff around that, the rising house prices and other stuff. There are also other disbenefits from it. Disbenefits? Why have I said that? Costs? I could have just said costs. But I would say on balance, most British people benefit in some way.
You remember.
I didn't exactly sum you up though. I was going to sum it up.
No, you didn't. I'll do it again.
I'll sum up is that most British people benefit from sterling, and yet we don't officially consent to this. So we start using sterling without thinking about it, and once we began participating in it, the participation becomes the consent, and then you're complicit in something that you never realise that you officially consented to. And for me, this contributes to this strange sense where people know there's something wrong. I know there's something wrong with the fact that the people that mine the stuff in my laptop, the people that mine the cobalt, I know there's something wrong in the fact that people that farm coffee are paid really low wages. I know there's something wrong, and yet it's hard because I'm the person benefiting from it. And there's this weird dual knowledge there's a problem, but lack of knowledge or understanding in how it could have come about. But I don't know someone. I think I've said a bit more than you said.
Well, I do. I can use that as a perfect segue for something concrete where you can show another picture, which you probably remember because I had it on all my slides always, where I got such a strong sense that something is so terribly wrong with the way even the Bank of England uses the word money, that I was pretty sure there's a PhD in there, and in the end that worked.
okay.
But I still have that picture in my thesis. And you remember, that's the screenshot of the YouTube clip where the Bank of England economist tries to explain what money is, and they wrote that groundbreaking paper where they finally said, no, money has nothing to do, and we don't even do most of your money that comes from commercial private banks, and we just do the notes and coins. And they write this beautiful paper, 10 pages long, in which they try to explain how money has nothing to do with gold, yet they come back to gold on every single page. They go gold, 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 gold. They're always saying not, but you know how the mind works, and you just keep repeating that word often enough, and then they have this new mandate and self-image of themselves being kind of the people's bank, and we explain economics to everybody, and we make it really accessible. So we make little YouTube clips explaining this complicated scientific paper.
Amal, we're here in the Bank of England's gold vaults to talk about money,
where the only thing they should try to say is money has nothing to do with gold, but they do go down into the vault to explain money has nothing to do with gold, with all these bullion behind them. The whole room is gold. And they don't say that in the video, but I think we've been there together when they told us, oh no, that's not our gold, we just keep that for other people. And
it's not, I mean, most of it is
we have one bullion. It's going to be, you touch it. so
it is true.
Just,
any video the Bank of England films to explain what money is, they're making the point with their words that it's nothing to do with gold anymore. And yet they always film it in the gold vaults.
Right.
So the words and the images don't back up.
What exactly does that mean, though? Does that mean that the Bank of England could give me £20 worth of gold in exchange for a £20 note? Not anymore. No.
And that's why I always use that as an illustration of that complicity that actually has two sides of it. On the one hand, they want to educate people. On the other hand, they really benefit from people not ever thinking about money and not ever considering how it's different from what they thought it was, because only that way they can maintain, and that's the other mandate, maintain the people's trust in their currency. And so just to reinforce that complicity and that non-consensual, that's how it is, and they just explain something without ever going, they didn't explain anything, and they just, even in the paper, they literally admit, like, we don't know what money is.
And even in the gift
shop,
because I love a gift shop. The gift shop is full of like gold bars, like gold chocolate bars,
you can eat them.
Gold money boxes, just loads of memorabilia. Although a lovely thing to buy, has nothing to do with if you want to understand what money is, then gold is not it's not that it, of course gold is a form of currency. You don't think so? Gold can be, surely gold is a form of currency.
Gold is a form of currency. How can a chemical element be anything social? I mean, you mean you could coin currency out of gold? That's a different thing. A gold coin can be a currency. Gold can be the way you ensure the purchasing power of a certain currency. But like, to simplify it to gold can be a currency, it's again one of those hegemonic ways they talk about it.
That's how gold would pop into your, if we're saying that money is the vague idea, it's the general idea, and currency the specific implementations, people are currently buying gold, you know.
But you would have to know, well, yes, but gold is not the currency. Like, you would have to make a unit system out of it. So grams of gold, ounces of gold, coins of gold.
Okay.
Unit. But just saying gold is the currency means, like, that's the same as saying, it's similar to saying money is energy, or we are the currency, or something. That's beautiful.
Love.
Very helpful.
Leander, love is the currency. It's all about
exactly.
love.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I'm not talking about the gold thing, but I feel like I'm happy to just be a bit unsure about it.
Right.
I don't need clarity on it right at the moment. I really like what you said, and that's helped me think about that thing about the implicit consent in the currency.
And again, this opacity around it, I mean, that's probably where the word hegemony comes in as well, and ideology, where, like, I heard ideology be defined as something that people don't realize they're adhering to because it's so ingrained, and it's just that opaque mesh of words that you're entangled with. And with money, with the word money, that's similar. Like there is a hegemony of people thinking they can define what money is, and they do it in so many different ways, and they don't let anybody look into their cards. And that's why my kind of twist on saying
Don't
money
anyone
is
look into
just a
their
concept.
cards?
Sorry.
I didn't hear
Well,
that.
they don't like the Bank of England opens a YouTube channel while remaining completely opaque of what's going on behind the scenes. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, to be
remember?
honest, I kind of love, not love, that's wrong with putting it. Of all the people that I find are putting out useful information now, that although I totally get that it's veiled and in some ways, and it is still quite confusing, I've found the Bank of England one of the best sources of information about money at the moment. I think they're pretty good. But
Which just goes to show how bad it is altogether. That's the best.
Yeah, I mean,
If the best source still writes on top of their paper, nobody knows what money is.
Yeah, and there's also, of course, the Bank of England has some really great people working at it and some really smart people working there.
Yeah.
So and the other great thing about it, if anyone's watching this at home, you can just call them up and like people will answer. I mean, not always, but you know, and there's also a lot of divergence of opinion in the Bank of England, so and they'll make a lot of that public. You know, they've got these discussion papers where people that are working there are like, oh no, we actually think Mark Carney was totally wrong about what he said about all this stuff. So it's a really I don't like how the Bank of England are characterised by some people in politics,
right,
in one whole thing, because they're an institution of people with different viewpoints.
That's important to stress. I didn't mean anybody in the Bank of England is malign. No, is it malign? Well, bad. I don't think they do that on purpose.
And I know you well, so I know that you're not into that. But if someone's listening at home, they might take that the Bank of England is misleading them, and that's not what you're saying, is it?
No, I'm just using them as an illustration of how convoluted that whole issue is.
Yeah, and also it's also the fact that probably the Bank of England, they do want to bling up their videos. You've got a gold vault. If I had a gold vault, I'd have that for a backdrop.
Well,
you know?
but ask yourself why that is. I mean, it's just a nice color. Yes, it doesn't corrode, but it's.
Yeah, I've got gold. I've got gold on my trainers. Look, I mean, I've actually already made a video of showing my trainers, but look at my gold trainers. I mean, gold and green. So you know, so gold. We love gold. Is that the conclusion? No, it's just a. I
don't love gold. And it's really, if you really take a step back and look at it, most of the value of that we ascribe to gold is also just socially construed. There's nothing so special. Well, there is a lot of things special about gold, but there's a lot more useful elements and material in the world, and that we got so obsessed with gold. As I would say, it's mostly an aesthetic thing, which is, it's great, yes, and some great artists should produce, well, it's not wrong that some art costs a lot and that's something beautiful valued.
So the £20 note that you're talking about is an IOU from the central bank to you. That's where the famous promise to pay inscription comes from.
What exactly does that mean, though? Does that mean that the Bank of England could give me £20 worth of gold in exchange for a £20 note?
Not anymore, no. A £20 note is worth £20 precisely because everybody believes that it will be accepted.
So I thought it might be helpful to just sort of recap on what we've said and what we haven't said so far in this video. So the main thing that we've done is we've settled upon Leander's definition of money. Other definitions are available, but for this video we're using this broad framework, which is that money is an abstract concept which, if you were to pin it down, it basically involves some transferable units that facilitate collaboration between people. Then inside this broad concept of money, we have specific currencies, which are particular implementations of the concept of money. So that's what we've come to, and I think that is actually quite a useful framework. We've also been cycling around this picture that I've got in the background here, and I think this is a great picture because this picture shows you one particular form of national currencies, which is notes and coins, and it shows you, as the Bank of England has just said, actually, really, that banknotes are IOUs or promises to pay. And I think what this image invites you to question is why it is that you would trust some IOUs issued by some entities and perhaps not by others. So I don't know if you would trust the paper note saying IOU on or not. I don't know if you'd accept that as a currency. I don't know, would you? Good question. Maybe not a good question, up to you. I just want to also clarify what we haven't talked about here is where money comes from. We've talked quite a bit about notes just because we were using this image as an example and we're using the Bank of England as an example. But of course, banknotes are not the only form of national currencies. So if you look at sterling, for example, banknotes are not the main way that sterling is used anymore at all, or cash. So we haven't discussed that. We haven't discussed where that comes from. And we don't actually in this video. So interesting question you might want to answer. So another thing in this video is we talk about modern monetary theory at the end, but we don't actually define it, which probably was a bit of an omission. I probably should have asked Leander to define what he thinks it is. But I would just say, though, broadly speaking, modern monetary theory is a set really of policy ideas that has become very popular in the US. It was linked with Bernie Sanders and his last campaign. It's becoming more popular in the UK, although we've also got other kind of intertwined and reasonably similar campaign groups like Positive Money. And very broadly speaking, they believe that the state should take a greater role in money creation and shouldn't be so limited in their idea of running deficits. Modern monetary theory as well has a particular set of ideas around the state's role in maintaining full employment. Now, that's probably a little bit vague, but do go to other places. If there are lots of other sources of information on modern monetary theory. But I thought I should just give it a little bit of a definition if we don't do it in the rest of this conversation. So, yeah, I'm going to go now, and I'm going to come back when you see me talking to Leander. So, but I just thought that might be helpful. Little interjection here. Maybe it wasn't helpful. I don't know. Was it helpful? What do you reckon? Anyway, all right then. See ya.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I was gonna pick up on
Gardening.
No, I said, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Gardening.
It's gardening. Oh, you want to talk about gardening?
Not necessarily, but I much rather concern myself with gardening than with money these days. Even if you do it well, and even if,
I would wholly respect that decision, because gardening is important, isn't it? In gardening, you do plant things and they grow, and some of those things may be more useful than.
That's funny, and yet you're assigning very economic value systems to it. It's more useful. You're producing this and that. Where I just enjoy it. It's just nice. It's nice talking to you about money, but mostly you're just the smart ass that has a very weird opinion and challenges people's minds, and you often tell people they got it wrong, and that's just not very nice. With gardening, even if it goes badly, it's still nice.
Do you feel that then? The thing that you just expressed, which is that, because one of the reasons that I felt I couldn't work in the money sphere anymore was and in fact somebody described this to me about people, and I didn't know what he meant until recently. He said that when you meet somebody that's very critical of the financial system and they've got another currency they want to start, so he was using it to describe one form of currency, a community currency called a time bank. He said whenever you meet people that are into this form of currency, they have this zeal in their eyes as if it's the only way of doing it. And I, at the time, thought he was just being cynical. But then I adopted that zeal for a bit for currencies. And then I realised that the problem I have with it is that I found that a lot of people hook onto money as the one problem that we have in the world. And if we could just change the monetary system, we'd have world peace.
It's a widespread sentence you hear, like money is the root of all evil and we just have to change this. Yeah. And yes, I agree with you that it's more of, well, I would say it's more of it's just as much a symptom as it is a cause. And of course that creates like a nexus where that's how the world is. Yeah. And the symptom is a cause to the next symptom, so to say. And that's why, I mean, we said that earlier, we might come back to that, like the way to describe money as an institution is done in a very appropriate way, because an institution is a set of rules that influences the behavior of agents, but they are only created by the behavior of agents. So rules influence behavior, influences rules, influences behavior, influences rules. And of course you can start to see where by certain behaviors you're introducing novelty and divergence, and you're creating new rules, or completely branching off into another set of rules by creating your own currency. That's all fine. But just to point to money as something that has a will of its own, say, it's like you...
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Money has a will of its own. Because it's true that it can be seen as, we didn't quite use that analogy, but we nearly got to it, that if you could, I would all, when you say money is this concept,
you could, if you compare it to something like a concept like language or a concept like transport, or would you even go so far as to compare it to a concept like energy, or not? But maybe I've got to. All I was going to
Well, there's a lot of concepts that then have very specific implementations. Like you could say, like a lot of people say money is like energy, and like if you want to use that analogy, it's better to say money is like electricity. It's not like energy. Like it's just too vague and too big to make. Oh, actually, sorry. Now I confused my own language. Money would be like energy, but pound sterling would be then a form of energy. So it's more like a currency. Currency is like electricity.
So you said money doesn't, because I think I agree with you, and I was just trying to check I agree with you.
Yeah.
That money doesn't have a will of its own. Well, this is the
yes.
point, isn't it? It doesn't.
Well,
energy doesn't exactly have a will. It's just human influence energy, right? I think
nice.
we're in danger. We're creeping onto the metaphysical.
Well, that allows us to say the word Bitcoin and crypto here, because often people say there's no rule, like there's no trust in that. Like, yes, of course, you trust the rules, one set by a person. So of course the Bitcoin system looks like something that is independent, and yet it always comes back to people. Any set of rules at some point had people behind it. So yes, of course, money can now be seen as a very powerful set of rules that does something that is really hard to engage with. And yet, of course, they were set by people implicitly or explicitly at some point. So it's
Bitcoin
never
is an example of why I have a problem with currencies, because it's like Bitcoin is an example where, oh look, people have managed to create a whole new currency called Bitcoin. Oh look, it's got loads of the same, if not, it's got some differences. Obviously, I feel it has some improvements on national currencies, but it also has some. So I'm not going to judge if it's better or worse. It's different. I would say that it's not in the goals that I would want to achieve with starting a new currency. Bitcoin doesn't meet them, and if anything, it has some. It's even worse in some respects to national currencies. But it's hard to. I won't describe it as worse. I think it's different. Let's not. I would. There are some things that do definitely commend Bitcoin. There are some amazing, incredible things about it. Do you want to say anything about Bitcoin, because it is, or how you feel about Bitcoin? And for people listening, I'm just going to say that we're going to say Bitcoin is money, is the concept. Bitcoin is a specific form of currency that has, it's doing pretty well at the moment. So in terms of how you define well, it's going up in value a lot at the moment. But
at least there you could see how it was deliberately designed, even if they try to veil that by saying, but we don't know by whom, as if it's like a God-given thing that was so superior and just dropped onto earth. But of course somebody thought about how he would like a unit system to facilitate some certain kind of collaborations.
Definitely, it does. It definitely facilitates. Yeah, the people listening at home might not be familiar with this, but you're saying stuff that feels familiar to me, because I've heard you say it before, which is it facilitates collaboration. That's what your overall definition of the money is, and the currency being a specific set of ways of. And Bitcoin does it in a very specific way, and it has some very clear differences to how national currencies work, in that it's pretty anonymous in what that's a very interesting and intriguing feature. Or maybe it's not. I don't actually know. Do you want to talk about Bitcoin? There's things that you feel you need to say. Would you like to? Do you like talking about Bitcoin?
Not in particular. I also find it a rather uninteresting example of a different currency. The biggest merit was that everybody has seen on the 8 o'clock news that money can be different. It didn't answer the question, what kind of money do we actually want? But it just opened up that question of, oh, look, it's very different from pound sterling. So how come we have pound sterling in the way we have it? And that was very useful also for everybody else who had that idea of recreating money in a new currency in a very different way.
Which would lead me on to and the next question, which you may not want to discuss, but the question that it leads on to is, what would you find a more interesting currency? And is that a question that you find interesting? Is it a question you're still pursuing, actively seeking or desiring there to be different currencies? Or even if you're not actively desiring it, if you think there are going to be different currencies emerging in the future that will either become as important as national currencies or even replace national currencies? I've thrown too many questions in there, but you can pick.
It's fine, I can deal with that. I'll just pick the ones I like. But no, I'm not currently after any particular currency that I
You don't
prefer
have a pet
over
currency.
anything. And I don't think I ever was. I was always just super curious that some people have very clear ideas and needs even that aren't met by conventional economics and conventional money, currency. So they created their own currencies in a very specific, targeted way. So if I was to judge good or bad for a currency, I always go back to the person asking, like, but what is it you actually want to achieve? If you tell me that, I can tell you, I can do the impact assessment of your currency and tell you if it's a good or bad one. But there's no, to me, there's no general universal way of judging good or bad for money. It's the purposes for having such a unit system is as diverse as the collaborations you might want to see in the world, which of course is as diverse or even more diverse than the kind of people you see in the world and the kind of needs you have in the world. Of course, there are some similarities in terms of basic needs of food and shelter, but apart from that, a lot of things are desirable to a lot of people, and they often look contradictory. So in what I do advocate for is people's openness to a world where we have many currencies expressing many value system and many kinds of desired ways of living side by side. And that's also why I did that PhD and why I looked at legislation and stuff, just to make the playing field more level for all these different ways of expressing value and wealth in the world. But
it sounded to me then that you do have a vision for a world where there are lots of different currencies. You see a world where people use lots of different, a diverse lot of different currencies, which isn't just a national currency. And you would like that? Are you striving towards that? Are you trying to build that world, Leander? We're running out of time, so would you have anything to say about modern monetary theory? How do you feel about it?
What?
About modern monetary theory. How do you feel about
modern monetary theory. What about it?
How do you feel about it?
I feel good about it.
Do you?
as much as I feel good about any group or person or scholar who actually looks at money as a thing that can be deliberated on, and they come up with certain conclusions, which the way they talk about it, just even because they are calling it monetary, well, modern money, and like they still think money is the national currency, and that's what they're talking about without leaving it a bit more open. I'm actually having kind of partly facilitating in a group where different monetary initiatives and schools are coming together to find out if they actually have a common basis. And because they all like so uncarefully occupy the term money for themselves, there's a lot of conflict, and positive money people or monetative people and modern monetary theory people are clashing just because they're going like, oh, what was it actually you're after, and why do you think that's better? And maybe your conclusions make sense with your set of preconditions and ambitions. Whereas when they talk about money, they all think they're after the same thing, and then that's where the big debates and the conflicts come.
Yeah, the good thing, I think we can summarize by saying that you're broadly in favour of the idea of debating money the way that modern monetary theory do. We didn't get a clear sense of whether you agree with their policy position. Maybe it's too big a discussion for today.
I never designed the ideal state and society for me, and I don't think I would ever do that. If I have a certain picture of how society should run, I could imagine that MMT policy proposals are exactly the right way to do that. We haven't deliberated enough on what we actually want to see in the world to then decide which monetary theory will work best. We all just assume that we all want the same thing, and we pretend that money is just one thing, so we're clashing over what that should do.
Yeah.
If you kept that a bit more open, saying, look, if you want to solve that kind of problem, that way of thinking that MMT brings to the table might be appropriate. If you're looking at the world with these kind of assumptions, your anthropology, basically what you think people do and should do, maybe positive money thinking makes more sense. Or also your openness to actually constraints from existing systems to what you can imagine as the new. I see a lot of merit in all of their approaches, and yes, I'm not the one who has to decide in the end.
Thankfully,
it's great if it gains popularity. It's great because more people will think about it, and then eventually, of course, if it was just those two, it would be ideal if we had a referendum saying, Do you want that or that? And here's why, and here is the potential risk and consequences. Let them choose. Don't let economists fight that battle for everybody else.
Yeah, although I guess, I mean, this is where we're veering into a big topic, which we're going to wrap up. But I suppose my sense is that there is a bigger debate that could be had than the one that MMT are putting on the table, which is about the role of state currencies and about genuine diversity. And my fear is that they're putting across a very, very specific way of interpreting the world, which also doesn't have very much historical context or power dynamics in it. It does within countries, but not globally. And then
that's why they're called modern. They don't have to consider history.
Yeah. Yes. And while I do love anything that brings up debate, I feel in the thing that I'm more interested in going towards is one where there is more genuine diversity, and I don't think modern monetary theory offers that. But perhaps it's a starting point.
It's weird. The people that I know there, they just haven't ever considered that what they're doing might actually snuff out all complementary currencies, to keep it practical. Like particularly if you were to rewrite laws to make it possible, and you still use the word money, and then you look at a complementary currency, well, if that's money, then they must be illegal, or they must comply to the same rules. And then yes, you've made the world a little less beautiful. But they mostly have just never considered that. Same as with positive money. When I came to the UK, positive money was writing a law draft that would have completely disallowed all complementary currency. In the end, Ben Dyson was at least handing out our book saying, look, there's other things and they're not bad. We're only talking about pound sterling and we would like that to improve. But of course, there should be a diversity of other means for people to organize their collaboration. That has changed big time.
Yeah, and I'm veering towards the spectrum of people need to have more power outside of the state and more power to organise.
Yeah, that's
globally, actually, not just nation states. So for me, anything that's so based around the power of some specific nation states, which is, if it happens, modern monetary theory is focused on the countries that already have the most power. I like your approach, Leander, which is like, isn't it great we're discussing money and debating it? And it, depending on what we want the world to look like, then we can see modern monetary theory is the best way. And it does have definitely a lot of merits to it. And a lot of people I know that describe themselves as modern monetary theorists are really interesting and great and lovely people. And it's great that they're engaging more people in this really interesting topic of money. And you know, it'd be great when they do add some history and other things in as well. And some of them do, to be honest. I'm characterising a huge field with just generalisations, so let's not do that anymore. So we're at time pretty much. Anything else you want to say, Leander?
Did we answer the question if I'm a world leading expert on money, or?
Who knows more than you?
Sorry, what?
Who would you say knows more than you? Not as a competition, but I'd say who are some good people that people are listening, other good people to check out. I think, who do we like? David Graeber's probably one of my favourite writers about money.
Rest in peace.
What's that?
Rest in peace. He died.
I didn't know that.
Sorry. It's not funny. It's funny. Well,
he was on Twitter like yesterday, surely. I can't believe that.
Graeber.
When did he die? No, he didn't die.
A month ago.
Did he? I didn't know that. How did I not know that? Well, this is going to be a really weird ending. I'm literally...
Yeah, that's a sad ending. Aw. But his books are still great. You should still read them.
He did. The last tweet was, how did he die?
I don't know how. He died in Venice, which was probably the nice thing about it.
I honestly didn't know that. I honestly am finding that hard to believe. This is such a bad ending to this.
Kind of easy to prove, right?
He's literally one of my favourite. I
don't know what you're looking at, but just Wikipedia
honestly
tells you
did not know he died.
September 2nd, 2020.
Yeah, 59.
Hmm?
That is a shame. That's the problem. So he's written a lot of stuff, luckily, when he was alive.
Well, now with him gone, I'm probably the...
The good news about this is that Leander is probably the best. I think you are. I think you're one of the people that's thought about it the most. And
just not so keen on publishing.
Yeah, and also because you speak about 500 languages, you've also read like all of the different like you've read a lot of different literatures that most people haven't like come across stuff. So yeah, so basically, if people want to check you out, then you don't publish much or talk about it much or go on Twitter much anymore.
Luckily, we don't have to give out any links or handles because there is only one with my name. So if
you want to promote anything, I mean, not promote is the wrong way of putting it. Promote gardening. That's what you're also doing. Encourage people to go gardening.
Invite me to
your
your
website.
garden.
I'll put the link to your website in the description. So if you want to check your website out.
Just my name is enough. They'll find me.
So yeah. Well, thank you, Leander, for chatting. And I know that I waffled a lot, so I'll see what I cut out. But